The biggest conundrum so far from our rookie drafts has been that the Seahawks drafted Zach Charbonnet to go along with Kenneth Walker, who was already a very high-producing fantasy back. So while we have sat here, and I personally have been crying about it for a couple weeks now, Nathan decided he was going to go in and figure out why this problem actually could mean good things for both of these backs. Simon's probably going to argue with him, and I'm going to sit here and smile at the camera. That's what we got coming for you today. Do us a favor, show us your support, drop a like on the video real quick, and make sure you're subscribed for accurate Dynasty research. And we're going to get into this today. Again, I think Pete Carroll straight up ruined Dynasty rookie drafts for me. Between taking Jackson Smith and Jigba, who now
solved his team's problem,
is not going any later, but people are shorting him. And then you have Zach Charbonnet, who people are clearly shorting him because he's going to an offense with an already established, very good young run. I don't understand why they. Anyways,
well, lucky for you, I solved the problem.
Well, I mean, that's what you're going to title this video, "We Solved the Biggest Problem in Dynasty." So if you don't solve the problem, people are going to come for you, the Skip Bayless of Dynasty
that's
content.
Fine. Apparently, I'm Skip.
All right, Skip. Let's hear it.
Let's hear it, Skippy boy.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah,
we both said Skippy boy. So first thing I want to throw out there is that we have heard time and time again that everyone in Dynasty has been saying, oh, they drafted Zach Charbonnet because this is just a repeat of what Pete Carroll wanted with Chris Carson and Rashad Penny. I want you to take that and I want you to throw it away. Just throw it away. It's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. We have never seen anything like this before in the Seahawks offense. And honestly, when I was looking back at the history of the offense in Seattle for the last 10 years, I got really, really discouraged, and I almost said to get these guys off your roster as soon as possible, Charbonnet and Walker. And then I really dug deep into the metrics and the numbers and the stats, and honestly, that kind of changed, and I'll tell you about it here. But the last true running back committee, okay, just on the Chris Carson and Rashad Penny train here, the last true running back committee was actually back in 2016 with Christian Michael and Thomas Rawls, where both of them each split about 150 carries apiece, and their receptions were garbage, and they had a few touchdowns combined on top of that. And really, both of them ended up being mediocre producing running backs. Outside of that, Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, once they came along, they actually only had 2 games together where they both had relevant carries because Rashad Penny couldn't stay on the field.
What?
2 games.
He couldn't stay healthy?
Oh, yeah, I know. Isn't that just shocking?
Sorry,
2 games in
Rashad Penny
2019.
joke.
That was it. So, again, just throw that out the window. I don't think Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet is a Carson Penny conundrum at all. So in 2022, Seattle had 350 total rushing attempts. That's excluding Geno Smith's 67 rushing attempts. And he, in Walker's relevant games, which was 11 games, he averaged 19 carries per game for 87 yards and almost, about 3.73 rushing touchdowns per game. So, and receiving upside was about 2 receptions per game for 14 yards and 0 touchdowns.
It's not good enough.
Not good enough.
Nope.
Not good enough at all. And that
That's
was
an extra 3.4 points.
Yeah, but it's not good at all for an elite receiving skill set.
No, that puts him in the bottom tier of receiving backs in the league. So.
Yeah. So now check this out from an efficiency standpoint. Kenneth Walker had 52 red zone touches last year. 52. That was 3rd in the NFL for running backs in 11 games. He had 17 breakaway runs, also 3rd in the NFL among running backs in 11 games. His true yards per carry, which is when you take away his breakaway runs, his runs over 10 yards, he was 38th in the league with 4.1 true yards per carry. So
just
basically
like Jonathan Taylor.
So basically that's saying when you take away his breakaway runs, that he's not a very consistent, efficient running back. You can make the Jonathan Taylor argument last year, but he literally couldn't do crap because he was the only weapon in that offense with a terrible offensive line, a quarterback that couldn't move, and couldn't pass to any of the weapons in that offense. It's a completely irrelevant argument because did the Colts draft a running back in the 2nd round this year? No. So I don't think there's a problem.
What about the Titans?
Yeah, Derrick Henry.
Yeah, 4.1 true yards per carry.
Yeah, and it's Derrick Henry.
But his volume is so.
Did they draft a running back
also.
in the 2nd round? No. They did draft Tyjae Spears this year because he's like 29.
He didn't have an ACL, so.
Tyjae doesn't?
No, he doesn't.
Yeah,
legit.
yes, I know this.
Truth. Yeah. So you're thinking like, okay, well, this is bad because the Seahawks spotted this, or now they're going to draft another running back in the second round and make this a full out committee because Kenneth Walker wasn't an efficient running back. We got to make this a better, more efficient run game overall. So we're going to bring in Zach Charbonnet. So what's this going to mean for Kenneth Walker? This means that his production's going to go down. He's going to be even worse than he was last year. False. Not true. So there were actually a lot. There were 6 games last year of the 11 where he played significant amounts of where he had significant amount of snap share last season.
Significant.
Greater than 75%, right?
Greater than 50%. Yeah.
50%, sorry.
And basically what he did is when he had less than 75% snap share, but greater than 50, so he actually had, relevant time, not just the beginning of the season, he averaged 5.77 yards per carry and the same amount of carries overall as he did when he had a bell cow workload from a snap share perspective. The 5 games where he had greater than 75% snap share, when they were wanting him to do more things in the passing game, wanting him to be a pass blocking running back.
More like an RPO piece out there.
Yep. He averaged 3.3 yards per carry on the same number of carries per game.
That's a very stark difference.
Insane.
So basically what that means is when they were asking him to go out there and pass block, and they're asking him to do RPO things, and they're giving giving him more snap share, he can have the same amount of carries, and he's half as efficient.
Exactly. What does this mean? This means Kenneth Walker is not a bell cow running back in that Seattle offense. And when you take him off the field for longer and bring him back in for splurts, he's actually more efficient and more effective. A guy that comes in my mind when I think of this is Najee Harris. Najee Harris is just like this. And that's why I think Najee is a really good value right now in Dynasty. Kenneth Walker is going to be the same idea here. He has fallen almost 2 full rounds in ADP since the Charbonnet pick.
Yes.
This should not be happening. I understand why he should have fallen a little bit because I think he was a little bit overvalued to begin with. He should have fallen back maybe a half round. Maybe, no more than a full round back. But again, if you take his snap share, I did an average here where I was like, okay, assuming his efficiency
Yep.
was what it was when he had less than 75% snap share, assuming that he's going to get less snap share and be on the field less, I said that he was going to have 5.5 yards per carry, 1 reception per game, because I'd assume that Charbonnet is going to get the passing threats in the backfield there, and 0.65 touchdowns per game, which is less than last year, and 14 carries per game. He was still an RB1. Still.
Even with 14 carries.
Even with 14 carries per game,
that's
with
like 5
that efficiency.
5 less carries.
So 14 carries on 5.5 yards. So
Yeah.
he's getting 75 yards per game, right?
Yeah, about.
Somewhere in there. 77, I think.
Yeah.
In 0.65 touchdowns, that seems like 11 or 12 points per game, right? Plus 1 reception maybe, so that pushes it up to 12 or 13 with the yardage from that. So that doesn't seem like a resounding RB1 season to me.
Well, I literally did the numbers, and
it
he
is.
ended up being an RB1. He
Like
was
this year, that would have
he
been
was a
RB1.
low-end RB1. Yep, he was a low-end RB1 for total points from a running back perspective.
I mean, it's a low-end RB1.
Honestly,
and that's about
yeah.
13.3 points per game.
Yeah.
And to your credit, Simon, you were probably less high on Kenneth Walker than all 3 of us.
True.
And you said, even though ETN should be falling as well, you
Yeah.
were higher on ETN because of his receiving upside and his efficiency metrics over Kenneth Walker, because Kenneth Walker was very hit or miss from an efficiency perspective. You ultimately were right. You caught on before anyone else did. You just didn't know it. But the Seahawks knew it, and they took Zach Charbonnet. So applause to you. Applause to you.
Yep.
If Kenneth Walker is being drafted as a guy who's on a rookie deal, who is probably going to consistently be a low-end running back 1, maybe a high-end RB2 at worst, then he should be going higher than he is right now, because there's so many older guys that are approaching second deals, already in a second deal, and are going to depreciate in value. And Kenneth Walker is, at the very worst, he's probably going to stay where he is.
Okay, so go ahead.
Honestly, I expected to be against you coming into this video, but I mean, just as you're saying that and looking at his efficiency metrics, right now, he was still 12th in the league in his juke rate. So he was the 12th most elusive running back in the league.
Yeah.
at, what is he, 22, 23?
Yeah, 22, I think.
Had the 8th highest breakaway run rate. So we're not just talking breakaway run numbers. So, I mean, honestly, I think I changed my mind in the middle of this video. You changed my mind. And like comparing him to Najee Harris, who is still, as we've seen over the past 2 seasons, a good fantasy running back with 17 points per game and 13 points per game. Najee was way worse. He had 3.7 true yards per carry. So if I'm going to be taking one of them, I'm going to be taking, I think, changing my mind in the middle of this video, I'm going to be taking Kenneth Walker.
I think you have me convinced too, but
Makes me very
my biggest question for the second part of this video is going to be, what does
Let's
this mean
do
for Zach Charbonnet?
Yep, and this is where it gets juicy because I think Zach Charbonnet, not as much as Kenneth Walker is, but I still think he's a soft buy. And a lot of my reasoning for this is going to be clearly, obviously, Kenneth Walker is not that guy when it comes to the passing game.
You're not that guy, pal.
And we've never seen a type of offense like this before for the Seahawks when they had Russell Wilson. Now they're transitioning to Geno Smith, potentially long-term. And they've got 2 very relevant running backs. They draft Jackson Smith and Jigba. They have Lockett. They have DK. I mean, this is looking to be, from a fantasy perspective, one of the premier offenses in the NFL.
Probably them and the Lions are the 2 that I would think of.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I came up with was, outside of the receiving upside, like, is that enough really for Charbonnet to produce at a high level when he's probably not going to get as many carries as Kenneth Walker? And if you take the number of running back carries they had last year, excluding Geno, I would say no. I don't think it would be possible for Charbonnet to be have a high ceiling or a high upside guy.
So how many carries would he be getting per game?
Well, this is what I calculated, because I found that over the years, the last season was very abnormal for the Seahawks in a Pete Carroll offense, because 350 carries was like the low end of what they usually do as an offense. And
because the RB2 is DJ Dallas.
Yes.
And Kenneth Walker wasn't a workhorse
Travis
back.
Homer.
Exactly.
So the drafting of Charbonnet basically is Pete Carroll saying, we want to run the ball more.
And a lot of times they were in shootouts, and they weren't a big fan of that. So when I looked back at 2018 and 2019, Russell Wilson, those were the 2 years where he ran less than he ever did for his other seasons in Seattle. He was a very high rushing upside guy, and 18 and 19 were outliers for him. He ran 67 times in 2018, and in 2019 he ran 75 times. And that was around the same amount of times that Geno Smith ran 67 times last season. In those 2 years in 2018 and 2019, the rushing attempts, excluding the QB rushing attempts in that Seattle offense, were 444 and 396 rushing attempts. So that's an extra 50 to 100 rushing attempts in that offense those seasons. And that's something where I would guess you're probably going to get closer to about 400 rushing attempts from the running backs alone in the Seattle offense.
Because they will want to throw it more.
Exactly.
With JSN.
They might throw
the same amount.
They might throw the same
Yes.
amount. Yes.
Yeah.
I would wager that they probably throw the same amount, and Geno throws around 4,000 passing yards like he did last season.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to want to run more, because they're going to want to control the pace of play in the game, because that's really where they fell short as an offense kind of towards the end of the season, is they ended up in shootouts, and Geno Smith isn't elite enough for them to really keep up with those guys. I mean, when you get to the playoffs and you're playing Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense and you're Seattle, you can't beat that team with Geno Smith. You can't. But if you have an elite backfield and you have Zach Charbonnet with the receiving upside, and you can dump it off to him and kill the clock, and you can get big chunks and big runs with Kenneth Walker and have him punch it in the red zone on short down plays, then you're sitting pretty. And this really increases even the volume for Zach Charbonnet, I think, between the 20s as well, which really helps his yardage.
Okay, so I'm still... What did you project him to have per game? His rushing attempts per game. We don't know anything about his efficiency in the NFL, but
right. Well, this is where I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about it and really what you think, because I personally I didn't feel comfortable calculating what he was going to do next year, because again, we haven't seen what he's done from an efficiency standpoint in the NFL, and that's so much different than what they do in college. Like, Kenneth Walker's efficiency was pretty bad. last season in the NFL, and he averaged over 6 yards per carry in college. Charbonnet averaged over 7 yards per carry in college.
Yeah, in his last year.
He was more efficient than Kenneth Walker pretty much in every single metric. And now you bring him into the NFL, I would assume all of that would go down. But, I mean, now that you have Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker, if Kenneth Walker is getting 14 carries per game, then
that's about 250.
That's about 250 on the year. Then that leaves about 100 to 150 rushing attempts for Charbonnet on first and second down, which I think is very.
Yeah,
I think that's very solid.
Probably less than 10 carries per game, but he'll pick up all the receptions that Kenneth Walker's losing,
Correct.
plus
4 to 5
more
points
because he's actually built for
receptions.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, and when you think about it from like a game planning standpoint from the Seahawks perspective, you can really see what they're trying to do. Last year, obviously, Kenneth Walker, you mentioned his breakaway run rate was very high. You saw a lot of the Seahawks, like you said, getting into these offensive shootouts where a lot of times what was winning them games was Tyler Lockett, on deep routes. And DK Metcalf is a big play guy as well. But when you're picking up these offensive assets like Zach Charbonnet and like Jackson Smith and Jigba not going to be a deep threat, more going to be somebody who works the middle of the field, who finds open spots in the defense and gets you some of these shorter yardage gains. It looks like they're trying to be more efficient and more methodical in the way that they move the ball, and less, I think they're trying to control the game from start to finish from an offensive standpoint instead of having to get themselves into situations where they're having to air the ball out or relying on a Kenneth Walker breakaway run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think this is just a great sign for the Seattle offense, for Jackson Smith and Jigba specifically, Zach Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker. I really think ultimately the guy who could potentially take a hit from a week-to-week standpoint is going to be DK.
Lockett.
And Lockett because he's aging,
and all 3 tight ends that had like 300 yards last year.
Yeah, the tight ends here are irrelevant. So really, I think this is a pretty solid situation for something that looked as disgusting as this landing spot was for Zach Charbonnet. I think really when you dig into the numbers here, you have a little bit of hope, and honestly, it may be worth buying the discount right now.
Okay, so here's my question. Currently, the ADP for Kenneth Walker is around the 5th round. We've seen him slide there. We've done plenty of mocks. We've done a couple startups. He's gone into the 5th round. I think all of us have taken him there at least once in one of those settings.
Yeah.
So where do you guys think he should be valued?
He should be going 4th round.
So you think he's around behind?
He should be going mid to late.
Wherever
4th.
Najee's going, put him 6 picks in front of that.
Yeah, and Najee is a buy right now too.
Are you taking Josh
higher.
Jacobs or Kenneth Walker in Dynasty?
I'm still taking Josh Jacobs. I think he's going to help you contend a lot better, especially for the next 2 years. Kenneth Walker is still 22, but I think Josh Jacobs, we saw him last year.
He's
RB1
only 24
overall.
still. Who are you taking? Because I don't know. Those are guys that if you really do
those
move
guys
Kenneth
are
Walker
absolutely in the same
they're going to be
tier.
in the same tier.
When you're
for
looking
me.
at Dynasty rankings, they're absolutely in the same tier. When you talk about the positional volatility at the running back position, I think you got to go Walker. Just for me personally, I know it's kind
Same
of
tier, though.
disgusting. Same tier.
Okay, so Charbonnet is going in the 8th or 9th round, I think, of startups.
Yeah.
Yep.
How much higher are you going to be taking Charbonnet?
Probably early. I think he should be going early 7th, and I think that's a really good value. Maybe even late 6th.
What do you think? Because that's just where I have a hard time.
From his draft capital alone.
Yeah, that's true. I
yeah,
mean, he's got a
like
ton of
second
insulation.
round.
Totally. I mean, goodness, this is
I mean, they drafted him that high. They're not going to not use him.
exactly.
I guess I'm comfortable with 7th. But again, these are guys
Would you
because
take him late 6th?
I probably.
I mean,
don't
I would
know.
never, from a market value perspective right now, I would absolutely never,
Right.
ever take Charbonnet.
But where
there.
should he
I
be
mean,
going is the question.
in a world where everyone was valued correctly, I think you can make an argument that Charbonnet could go late 6th.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. So now, obviously, the do from this video is going to be when Kenneth Walker falls to the 5th round, when Zach Charbonnet falls to the 8th, 9th round. That's where you're taking these guys. And obviously, if you are in a place where you can get one and the other, they're not bad to both have on your roster. Even if that's just waiting to see how their production sorts out and then selling the other one later, which is possible. That being said, the do from this video, like I said, going to be drafting those guys where we think their values. And again, the 5th round for Kenneth Walker, the 8th, 9th round for Charbonnet. This is good. In rookie drafts, the 112 for Charbonnet, where he's been going, if he's getting to the 2nd round, I think you're taking him there all day.
Easy.
Because I'm taking him over Roshan Johnson. I'm taking him over Devon Achane. I'm taking over some of the early 2nd round NFL draft capital receivers. So you're taking him there. And honestly, that's a pretty good value because that back end of the first, early second is pretty muddy right now with Will Levis, Dalton Kincaid, Zach Charbonnet, Devon A-Chain, guys like that, Marvin Mims even. So these guys are values in Dynasty. What can you do to make your Dynasty team better? You can add them to your team at this price. And again,
at this price, you're taking both of them all day.
Yeah.
And that's a great stack to have on your team where you have both of them. And I know people hate doing that type of thing because, like you said, the last true 2 RB committee was in 2016.
And it was bad. But
if you have both of these
backs.
guys and you're in, like let's say you've avoided running backs through the beginning of your draft, if you get them in the 5th and the 8th round, you can just slot them both in at RB, and if they
Very
both
little
give
risk.
you, I think you're going to be fine there.
Because if you miss on one, your chances are you're probably going to hit on the other. And with their values right now, you're not really they're going to cancel out when when one of them
kind of like AJ Brown and
doesn't
Devontae Smith
produce.
at the beginning of last
It
year.
was kind of a win-win because of where they were going, distance-wise. And
well, here I'll ask
so
you
much.
this, and this is probably the best example I can think of. How many fantasy points a game did DeAndre Swift have last year?
13,
How many fantasy points per game did Jamal Williams have last year?
11.
13.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, those are guys that if you're starting
Kenneth Walker
2
is-
13 points per game guys, like
that's
one
great.
in a running back spot and one in a flex spot, that's perfect.
And that's
That's
really
exactly what you're
encouraging.
looking for. And
It's
not to
encouraging.
mention, these guys both have, you're just starting these guys who are going to be producing at this level. And with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, I think this is getting into the range where we'd expect them to produce, but they also have really good value insulation. So add them to your team at this price. Let us know what you think in the comments about what we said today and all of Nathan's very, very good research. Good
Sorry,
job.
guys. It was a lot of numbers.
No, it was great.
It was
great.
fantastic. Very good research. This is what we like to do. We like to get into the data. We like to get into numbers and be able to analyze it, break it down, and draw conclusions from it. So make sure you subscribe. We're going to have videos like this all offseason trying to help you win your Dynasty leagues. And make sure, do us a favor, show support, like on the video. We really appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.